Man, I got two older kids. They're my boys that you may not have met. I know you met Jackson and you met Abby, and some of you met Jared and Eric, but they're 3 years apart. They're men. They're good, godly men. Not that they started out that way. And man, when they were younger, they were just rascals. You know what I mean? You know, a rascal. That's what my dad used to call some people. They were just rascals. They were just rumble tumble kids. They were always getting in trouble. They were teaming up and ganging up on their mom, from time to time, and they'd do things when boys grow into men. They challenge their moms. It's kind of who they are. And I had to remind them, listen, I loved her long before I loved you, and I pulled out one of those old lines. Listen, you know, don't fight me on this. I'll knock you out, and I'll make another one just like you, right? And we even proved that, right? I mean, I got Jackie Lee came along, right? And so, but we would do those things, but I remember, man, in our younger days, I just got tired of spanking them, and I don't apologize. We spanked our kids. Now, we didn't abuse our kids; we spanked our kids. I'm not into that gentle parenting thing that they got going on these days. I'm just telling you, it ain't gonna go well. And so, but we spanked our kids. But I was so tired of doing that. And I may have shared the story before, I don't know. But man, there was a time I was so mad in both of them. And I always sent them to the room. And I had a reason for doing that. One, I needed to calm down. And they needed to be afraid. Very afraid, right? And so two good things happen when you send them to your room, right? They're like, oh man, Daddy's going to beat us. And they're going to try and, try to, especially when you put them in there together. And I didn't always put them in there together. But that's what would happen. And then I'd calm down. I'd go in there. And I'd sometimes I had to talk first because they couldn't pay attention because they were too worried about the whipping. And so I'd talk first and then whip later. And then sometimes I'd whip first and then talk later. And then we'd pray and we'd go on about our day, right? And so there was this one day, man. So I made him in there and I went in there and I said, Eric, come on out. He was the youngest. Get out of here. Close the door. So he did. And I'm in there and I'm talking to Jared and I'm making bend over the bed. And I take my belt and I beat that bed as hard as I can beat that bed. And then I look at him and I say, "Nah, I don't want you to ever do that again." And he looked at me with these big old wide eyes. And he walks out of that room and I hear him come by Eric and he looks at him and he looks at Eric because Eric's heard the beating. He thinks I'm next, man. I'm going to get beat. And Jared looks at him and goes, he missed, right? and so so I brought them both into the bedroom and I said, man, are y'all tired of getting beat as I am beaten? Because I'm just tired, right? And I said, can we just not do this anymore? And I remember it was a life-changing event for our kids. And I tell you that story because I think sometimes God's a lot like that with us, right? He's fully wrathful, right? And he's just. But at the same time, he's just full of mercy too, right? And I think what we find, if we're not careful and we get into the book of Judges, we go, man, that is a mean God that we serve. But we're going to see because the Old Testament looks that way, right? But we're going to see he and Jesus, they are the same God, right? We understand that. And so Jesus is full of wrath too. Now, he didn't come the first time to bring wrath. The first time he came to bring mercy. But there is a statement in the book of the Revelation that's undeniable. And it's something called the wrath of the Lamb. And so it's being stored up. And it will come. And the next time we see Jesus, we'll see a Jesus that's bringing and meting out justice. And he will unleash his wrath on mankind, right? And our job has to be to disrupt that kind of stuff. I want to. Everybody's on a path to that, to be standing in the way of that wrath. I want to disrupt their life, right? Isn't that who we are? I want to be a holy disruptor and say, man, if you don't get out of the way, if you don't start crying out to God, and you don't repent, you're going to be right in the middle of His wrath, and there ain't no escape from that, right? That we have to be able to be those people. But God in the Old Testament had told them time and time again, didn't He? You do this, I'm going to bless you. You don't do this, I'm going to let the curses fall on you, right? And so this has been His constant battle. And so we're going to get into this book of Judges, and it's bizarre and it's brutal. And some of it I'm probably not going to read out loud. I'll leave it to you to read yourself because it's brutal. But it is God reminding the people of Israel of who He is. And so I say that just to warn you. All right, and I'm going to give you a big review. Today's just a review before we get into Judges. We are going to look at the first 2 chapters. But I want you, before I read the chapter, I just kind of want you to hear the overview of where we're going so that it'll make sense to you. So in this book of Judges, now, Judges falls after Joshua, right? And so if we look at things, we know that Abraham was given a promise that he was going to make a great nation, right? And then there was Isaac that he made the same promise to, and there was Jacob that he made the same promise to, and then we saw what happened was that Joseph came along, Jacob's next to the tail end of his family, and a famine had struck the land, and God sent Joseph to become a ruler in Egypt to prepare for the famine, so that when it came, he could bring his family into that place, right? And so for 430 years, Israel was in bondage to Egypt. And then Moses brought them out. They could have gone to the promised land. That's where Jacob was when they called him out to Egypt. 430 years they wandered in that brutality of slavery under Egypt. God sent a deliverer, right? God's mercy shows up. And so when God's mercy shows up in the form of Moses, they see his great power and his deliverance. And then they could have gone right into the promised land, but they lacked the faith to believe that God was who he said he was. So he spent 40 years showing them who he was. And in those 40 years, he was a merciful God. In that 40 years, they never had to hunt for food. He always had manna at their disposal every day but the Sabbath day, and they couldn't store up because it wasn't only on that day. You tried doing it any other day, and it wasn't going to keep. It was going to ruin. And then he created Teflon clothes for them. They never wore out. He met every need they had. Moses is gone. That's 40 years. And then you've got Joshua shows up. 50 years they're with the leader Joshua. And they're fighting the battles. And they're seeing them fought. And they're seeing victory. Last week we saw the close of that 50-year segment. And that's when Joshua says, hey, listen. Here's all that God's done for us. And he said, you got to clean this place out. And you need to do the right thing. And I'm just telling you, it's for me and my house, we're serving the Lord. And they said, yeah, us too. And he said, are you sure? I think you're not. And so now Joshua's dead. And we're going into another study. And it's called the study of the Judges, right? So Judges is one of those stories in contrast. And this is what I want us to see, right? God is fully wrath, and he's fully merciful, right? He's fully just. He means what he says. He's just. If he says he's going to do something, he means it. And he says, if you follow me, this is going to happen. If you don't, this is going to happen. If you let the Canaanites live in your land, this is going to happen. If you drive them out, this is going to happen. We clear on all those things? And that's kind of true of our own heart. Remember, we see in the Old Testament story that when we came to Christ, he put me in the promised land. My heart is in him now. But there's sin, residual effects of that old man that's still in there. My job is to put those sins away, right? That's my part. And as I do that, I find more and more blessing. I find peace. I find joy. I find patience, right? I don't find material blessings in doing that necessarily. I find those eternal blessings of this attitude of love and joy and peace and patience and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and kindness and self-control. The things that make everything okay no matter what's going on around us. If that's our attitude, we don't have to say life's going to be okay. It's okay now, right? And so this is where we find ourselves. So he's mindful that this nation of his is going to have some rebellion. Psalm 103:14 says, for he knows how we are formed, and he's mindful that we are but dust, right? So he understands that. Just like I understand my kids, they know to do right, and I think they want to do right. It's just hard, just like it is for me. So sometimes I was wrathful to them and brought out justice, and sometimes I'm like, hey, here's mercy, right? Israel and us. Israel was to be the light of the world. That's who God wanted them to be, right? He told Abraham, I want you to leave the land of your fathers. I want you to follow me. I'm going to make of you a great nation, and I will bless your nation, and I will make the number of your nations larger than the sands on the shore, and I will make you a blessing to the world. What he was wanting was to create a people that would live for him, to showcase to the world what God-fearing people look like. This was what he had called him to be. That's a large calling. A light to the world. That means to live holy, and then to know that they were going to usher in the Redeemer, that from their line was going to come the Redeemer, not just for them, but for all nations. And then Israel shows the futility of trying to be holy, right? So there's two things at work. They're called to be the light of the world, and they go, we can't do it, right? What was the point? God's point was that they would become the light of the world, but also to show them that they can't do it by themselves. That's the point. That's the whole point. That's what the law was for. It's a tutor to teach us. And man, as try as I may, I can't keep those 10 commandments. 10 little commandments. And I can't keep them. Right? I don't think any of y'all have. I'm just checking. But I don't think so. We've all failed. If not the letter of the law, we didn't keep the spirit of the law. Right? Maybe I didn't commit adultery, but if I thought it, it's the same thing. Maybe I didn't actually steal your stuff, but if I thought about it, it's the same thing, right? Maybe I didn't kill anybody, but if I thought hateful thoughts, it's the same thing. That's the whole point here. Israel shows the futility of trying to be perfect. So we need God to provide some sort of lamb, some sort of scapegoat, right? Some deliverer, redeemer. And the whole point of what's going on is they are a living example of what God's doing in the whole world. So Judges is a story in the contrasts of life, but it's also a story in separation. This is what the church has forgotten, but it's a story in separation that God said, I want you to be a holy people, and I want you to drive out the pagans. He said the reason why? Because if they linger with you, you're going to be tempted to want to do some of the things they do, and that's not holy, right? And the three things that they were obsessed with, all these other nations, was wealth. Where that greed comes in. That's where wars come in. Greed, sexual immorality, and worshiping idols. Those are the three things. He said, if you let them in, you're going to fall. You're going to be just like it, right? So he says obedience it means to separate from the world so that you could be blessed. So for us, it's spiritual blessings, right? When you and me separate out from the world and we don't live like them anymore. And all the scriptures speak of this, right? Don't love the world or the things of the world. All that's in the world, lust, the eyes, lust, the flesh, both for pride of life, and it has just destruction, right? Be transformed, right? Don't be conformed to this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Paul would say this, hey, listen, here's the way the Gentiles live. And such were some of you, but you are washed and you've been redeemed. And so that's not who you are. Such were some of you, right? And so there's that reminder, and we see it everywhere. Disobedience, even partial disobedience, is disobedience, right? And so he reminds them of that. And so for you and me, that means that we reap what we sow. He's forgiven us, but you go try starting to dabble into sin and see what happens. He says, okay, all right, go ahead. I got an eye on you. I still love you, and I'm still redeemed you. But I'm going to let you understand the principle of the law of the harvest. You're going to reap what you sow. Right? And be sure to this, your sins will find you out. But he lets us have our way. Puts us on a little long leash, so to speak. And we're going to find out that, man, I wish I hadn't done that. Every regret you and I have is because we didn't adhere to what God says in his word. Every single one of them. Right? And so this is what we are. And so Judges is also the story of God's non-negotiable standard. Sin corrupts. Right? And he says, I want my people purged and purified. Remember Achan, when all he did was Jericho fell, and he goes, I know God said don't take it, but it's shiny and it's pretty. I'm going to put just a little in my tent. And just a little in his tent brought the wrath of God. And God said, not in my watch, you're not doing that. Remember, he brought out the line of Judah. From that tribe, Judah, he brought out a clan, and from that clan he brought out a family. From that family he brought out one man, Achan, who goes, it was me. And then God took his whole family, killed them all. Threw what they got from that place, into the pit with them and left it there to rot. It's a sobering story. Ananias and Sapphira is kind of a New Testament example of that, right? You know the story? Hey, you're free to bring anything or not bring anything. But they pretended to bring everything and kept some back. It's the same thing, just kind of in reverse. And they walk in, and Peter gives them a chance. Hey, did you give everything? You said you gave everything. And just questioning. Did you? Oh, yeah. Bam, they drop dead, right? God is serious about this stuff. That's why even through the scriptures, he said, some of you are sick and some of you are dead because you don't take seriously this thing called communion. We read these in our Bible, but we don't know where to put them in perspective. But they're in there. And he wants us to be purified too, right? To drive out Canaan from us, to be holy because he's holy, to put to death the old man. Listen, if I give you the fast track on what it means to be a Christ follower and how to be spiritually mature, is to take that old residual effects of the old man or woman, whatever you want to call it, and put a chokehold on that thing and punch it in the face until it's gone or beat silly, that it's numb, right? It'll never be gone this life of eternity. But we have to put a chokehold on it and deny the old flesh. And so maybe I'm being too graphic in how I see it, but every day that's what I want to do, man. I know what my old man can do. My old man knows how to be a terrible husband. My old man, the old man in me, knows how to be really sarcastic toward that woman that God's given to me. And I know y'all can't believe that, right? I'm just the perfect picture of everything. But that old man in me knows how to get mad at somebody who pulls out in front of me because I think I own the highway. That old man in me can do all kind of crazy stuff. And if I don't grab that sucker in the mornings and punch it in the face and go, not today. Now, I'm not telling Satan not today. He don't listen to me. But my flesh does. My flesh is saying, not today. Right? That's what we have to do. Because when I do that, I've weeded the garden and the fruit of the Spirit pops up in my life. And I have love, joy, peace, patience, goodness. That way I don't treat her the way I ought to. That way I don't treat those people on the road how I ought to. How I want to. It's about what I ought to. Right? That's all free. I'm not even charging y'all for that. Now, so God cares about those things. And listen, these are the things you and I need to know about him. He's non-negotiable. If we are in the business of removing that sin, the residual effects of it from our life, we need to understand something. The thing that the world wants you to have, all the greed, all that wealth stuff, and all of that sinful stuff, he is the complete opposite of that. He is my provider. I don't have to go grab from anything. He provides for me. And my God shall supply all my needs according to his riches in Christ Jesus. I don't have to try and cheat the government. I don't have to try and finagle somebody. I don't have to try and squeeze every dollar out of a sales deal. I can just simply say, if the tables were turned, how would I want to be treated? I don't have to get the lowest price or the highest price for something I'm selling. I just want to give a fair price. Why? Because I'm not counting on that person being able to sucker out of him one extra dollar to meet my need. God's going to do that. Does this make sense? This is good. And so he is provider. He told Abraham, I'm going to provide you a son. Abraham didn't think so he made his own. Did that go well for him? No. Right? Isaac gets up there, and what do we find? God makes a promise. That's where we get the name Jehovah Jireh. God sees me, that's the word Jireh, with a means to provide. He sees my need. He knows the need I have, and he anticipates the provision of it. So when Isaac is on that altar and Abraham has that knife, there's a ram in the thicket that God put there because he knew the need was going to come, that they were going to sacrifice, and it wasn't going to be Isaac. So God said, that's the whole story. You and I can't miss that. Jacob, he didn't know his family was going to go through a famine. God did. And so God sends Joseph, gives him a dream, which gets him in trouble, which sends him down this long road of trouble till he ends up on the high road where he can save his family from the famine. Who put him there? God did. Isn't that what Joseph says? Reminding his brothers and sisters, hey, listen, you were trying to kill me. I get it. You didn't want me around. I heard you loud and clear, all 11 of you. But here's what I'm saying. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. You're getting fed, you're getting fed, and you're getting fed, and Daddy's getting fed. Everybody's getting fed. Why? Because God made a provision. This is good. I hope we're hearing this right. Moses, same thing. Oh, you don't like what I'm giving you? Fine. I'll let you choke on quail. I'm going to give you so much you can't even dig your way out. And then you'll be saying, hey, can we have some more of that manna? Right? He said, I'll provide. I'll over provide for you. I can do it. You ain't going to want it. I can over provide. But you ought to trust what I give you, because what I give you is just enough. And this is what he's teaching. And he's also pure. Listen, you're going to go with those people, and you're going to start getting sexually immoral with that. God's not in favor of sexual immorality. I don't know if you heard that or not, but he ain't in favor of it. He's in favor of one man, one woman, forever. Now, he's gracious in the middle of that, but that's his plan, right? And we see that all the way through the scriptures. What was the one thing that they were doing in Canaan that he said, this is what's going to happen? They're going to lead you down into sexual immorality. And they did, right? What does he say in the New Testament? Don't be deceived. Those who live like this in sexual immorality, along with greed and a bunch of other things are in there, will not inherit the kingdom of heaven, right? And so nobody's preaching that anymore, but I'm just telling you, that's what's in the Word. And then the second thing is, so God is a provider, and God is pure, and he's also premier. He's a jealous God. I will have no other gods before me. And so that's why he tells them, listen, don't worship Baal. You let those people stay in here and you don't clean house, you're going to end up worshiping Baal. And you're going to start sacrificing your kids to him, and I'm going to get really angry with you. And I'm going to let you have your way and let it just ruin you. And I might even pile on and send some locusts and other things just to finish the job off. I'm going to divorce you, he told them at one time. I'm done with you. That's his wrath. His mercy kicks in. And he goes, okay, I'm not going to divorce you. I'm going to chase you. Here's the story I'm going to give to you. I'm going to let Hosea be an example of what I'm going to do for you. You go chase everybody else, and I'm mad as a hornet, but I ain't letting you go. I will. See, that's our guy. I will not let you go. Come on, this is good. This is good. We just need this stirring up in us. So the Canaanites, who are obsessed with wealth and sex and idol worship, he's for their own good saying, don't tolerate that. This is why you and me, we can't. This was a story last week. As for me and my house, I'm serving the Lord. I'm going to get rid of all that stuff. Man, if it doesn't please him, I know there's something in my old man that itches to see that stuff. I'm not going to let it happen. I'm not going to let my eyes see something that won't bring God glory. I'm not going to let my ears listen, just like you were talking about. I'm not going to gossip I'm not going to hear what God doesn't want me to hear. I'm not going to say with my mouth what God doesn't want me to say. And I'm going to let my heart be leaned toward things that God says isn't good for me. Right? This is the whole point of this whole book, as brutal as it's going to be. And so I titled this message, not that y'all care about the title, but the cycle we find ourselves in. All right? And that we're going to hear it. You're going to get tired of hearing it. This is the cycle that we find ourselves in. Right? God's put us in a really good place. And then our little wandering eyes are going to start seeing shiny things all around. Shiny people that we think we want to do something with. Shiny objects that we think we want to collect. And shiny idols that we think maybe we'd rather worship. And God's going to go, okay. That's what you want? Okay. And then with that always comes the bite of oppression, right? Every sin has a wage. It's death. And so it may start slow, still death, right? And so that's what happens. So we get oppressed, and that sin nags at us, and it weighs us down, and we go, Lord, have mercy. And we want to blame everybody else until at some point we come to that place where we go that my problem is not her, my problem is not him, my problem is not that, my problem's me. And we cry out to God in repentance. And he delivers us because he's just that faithful. And we have peace. And then we sin. And that cycle goes over again. If that's not the story of your life, you ought to thank God. Because that's the story of most of our life. We take about 2 steps forward and 1 step back. 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I just start making steps. I don't want to go back anymore. But I know my troubles. And I know that old stinking old man is hard to put down. So that's where we are. That's the overview of the book. Now, real quickly, I just want to kind of read to us a text. and let us see some things. So it's going to read a little awkward because Joshua's going to die twice in the book. And I don't want you to get confused by that. He's going to die in chapter 1. He's going to die in chapter 2. It's a review. All right, people get tripped up. You start reading commentaries and these guys get all whacked out. And I'm like, it's not that hard. It's the same thing. There's Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. They both talk about creation. One from a 30,000 foot flyover and one from right up close. If you don't, it's not like, there were two creations. No, dummy. It's just one. He's speaking about two different sections. I say that as nicely as I can. And so this is, I want us to see this in the text. But let's start out, all right? It says, now it came about after the death of Joshua that the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, who shall go up first against us? So it starts out well, right? Joshua's gone, and they're like, well, then I guess the Lord's in charge. So let's ask him. Joshua's not around. Let's ask him. Do you see that? Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have handed the land over to him. Now, Judah is the largest tribe and the strongest tribe. It is, not to beat that horse, but it is the tribe of which King David will come out of. And it is the tribe of which, I love the phrase, the Lion of the tribe of Judah comes from, right? Because he's the one we're all looking for. And so this is Judah, and he's going, Judah's got this. Why? Because they know there's a lion inside of Judah, right? Are you hearing me preaching? This is good. Now, the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have handed the land over to him. Then Judah said to his brother Simeon, hey, you come up and go with me to the territory allotted to me and fight, and I'm going to turn and help you. That's good stuff too, right? Brother helping brother, right? Let's work together. Let's do this thing. You know what they saw in the first 19 verses? Victory. You get to the middle of the 19th verse, and it says this, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had iron chariots. Now, they're doing pretty good. And they get there, and I feel like it's almost Moses in the beginning all over again. Right? They could take the land, but the giants in the land, and 10 of them freaked out, right? Man, fruit's good. Giants in the land. And they got afraid. Here, listen, did God say they could take victory? Yes, right? So these chariots were not the problem. Their faith was the problem, right? It goes back to that verse in wherever it is. One of the Psalms. Some trust in horses and some trust in chariots. But we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. They forgot that. Maybe that psalm hadn't been written by the time. I'm sure it probably hadn't. But they, because David wrote it, and David hadn't done it. This is at a time before the kings. Israel had kings. So they didn't know that yet, but they will soon learn that. But that's probably where it came from, right? And so this is what he's saying. So now they're struggling, right? And do you know what happened? I'm not going to tell it to you, but 19 through 34, let me just list it for you in a hurry. Benjamin failed. Manasseh failed. Ephraim failed. Zebulun failed. Asher failed. Naphtali failed. Dan failed. That's chapter 1. You got it? Started out pretty good. They were listening to the Lord. And then they got there, just like Peter in the boat, when he's out to walk on water and he's looking at Jesus, everything's good. He starts looking at his circumstances and he sinks. They started out well until they got their eyes off God and looked at chariots and go, oh man, we're in trouble. That's what happened. Man, this is rich for me. I'm loving this. Now, so we get to chapter 2. Now the angel of the Lord came up to Gilgal to Balcom and said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall not make a covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you've not obeyed me. What did they do? They let them settle in the land, and they enslaved them. We didn't read that, but that's what happened. They couldn't drive them from the land, so they just made them slaves. The principle, I think we learned there. Enslaving the enemy is simply controlled chaos, right? You talk to an alcoholic that's an alcoholic, and they go, well, I can control it. I'm just going to buy a miniature instead of the bottle, and I'll be good. You think that's ever going to go well for an alcoholic? It's just controlled chaos. You think you can go, I'm not going to sin all. I'm not going to be angry, but I'm going to keep it in my pocket. Right? And that's what's going on here. Enslaved enemy, put it in whatever, you got to burn the sucker up. You got to punch it in the face. You got to kick it. You got to bury it. You got to drown it. Whatever it is you got to do. But you don't go, I know it's not good, but I might need this. I'm going to put it right here. Right? I'm just telling you. That's what they did. This is what he's chastising them about. Elimination of the enemy, that creates certainty. And if you and I don't get the understanding of that, we're in big trouble. And so this is where we are so far. Chapter 2, 1 through 5, right? Now, we get to verse 6, and he reviews the wars. That's why Joshua comes back. He's just, the writer, which is most likely Samuel, he's just writing to remind. Now, he's cleared the air, and now he's going, oh, let me start over. This is a review, right? It's just like me when I review every Sunday. And you go, wait, you said that last week. I know. It's like the old preacher. I'm going to tell you what I told you. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. Right? It's just repetition all the time. And so this is what it's doing. So he's back to the beginning. When Joshua dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went, each one to his inheritance to take possession of the land. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen the great work of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaza. Now, this is what he wants to get to, because that generation didn't do everything they were supposed to do. And it says this, all that generation also was gathered to the Lord, to their fathers, and another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor even the work which he did to Israel. So chapter 2 is all about saying, hey, your sins are going to find you out. Be sure of that. And then verse 6 through 10, a review of where Israel was and a review of where they are now. There's a generation that arose that did not know God. This is why last week's message you should revisit, and you should make sure that you gather your kids together and you say, as for me and my house, we're serving the Lord. That's why they told the stories that they did. That's why they piled the rocks in the middle of the river. Why did they do that? Do you remember that? Because there were some nations that were going to stay on this side of the river. And they said, hey, we promised to go over and fight for you, and we know what's going to happen. We're going to go and fight, and we're going to do that, and then we're going to come back and settle in our land, and our kids are going to pass away, and your kids are going to pass away, and then your other kids are going to go, well, you're not even of our faith. You're not even in the land of Canaan. You don't belong to us. And they said, we're putting those rocks right there to remember that. And that was why when they would set up wells to remember that God made their provisions. And this is what if we don't do that, here's what's going to happen. Another generation is going to raise up who does not know who God is. And we're seeing that right now. I'm just telling you, we're seeing that. We've seen a watered down of the American church today to the point that what's happened is we've watered down the gospel, and the unbelievers think they're saved because they filled out a card in a church somewhere. Or they prayed some memory prayer that somebody told them to pray. But it's not about what we utter with our mouth. It's what comes out of our heart. It's a transfer from the mind to the heart. We've watered that down. And in trying to so entertain the unsaved that have gathered, we have not even taught holiness or purity in the church. So we have inept people who think they're saved, and we have those who are saved who don't understand what it means to be saved, to be holy and pure. You see this? That's what happens. And so if the church doesn't course correct, we may not see it ever again. Because they won't be prepared for that persecution. They'll just cave and go, well, okay, we're good. We'll serve whatever God you want. There'll be a remnant, because there always is. And they'll be called the martyrs and the persecutors. They're the ones who are going to take a stand because they didn't forget, right? And so I'm just saying we need to prepare our kids for these things. This is why what's happening here matters in this text. And then chapter 11 through 23, and we're not going to go there, but chapter 2. But all he's going to do is review everything. It's a recap of the cycle that we find ourselves in. Then the Lord raised up judges, right? I will tell you, verse 11 through 15 is all about the goofiness that they did. And they became distressed. Verse 16, then the Lord raised up judges. Now these judges don't wear robes and they don't have a court, right? It's not that kind of judging. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to being a superhero, sort of one who makes right. And these are, we're going to find, I think there's, I can't remember now how many of them there are, but 13 maybe. But they are, some of them are scoundrels. I mean, scoundrels. You look at Samson; he's a dirty scoundrel, right? But the point isn't the judge. The point is God heard your cry of repentance, and He sent someone to course correct. He sent someone to do the dirty work and kick out the people that you failed to do, right? And so this is what a judge is. So don't see that as some holy guy that sits in a robe and has great wisdom. These guys are scoundrels, most of them. We're going to read of a left-handed one next week who, we'll get to that story when we get to it. It's a fun story. It's a weird story, but it's a good story. We'll get to those next week, okay? So that's all I've got for us today. I just want us to hear that. I know it kind of felt like a gunshot approach, but there was a method to what we looked at. And so I just want you to hear it from what you heard and just watch as God changes our lives. And so it's going to be an interesting journey through the book of Judges. So Lord bless you guys. Glad you came. Man, we're going to sing a song. We sang it a few weeks ago. I can't get enough of it.